Good afternoon, Sonia.
Hi. We're back for another episode. This time is episode 6. And it's a little bit of a short episode, but it's very poignant. It has some really valuable lessons in it. So I want you to take it away and just see where we're going to go with it today.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm looking forward to having more fun in this episode. Again, like previous times, it's good to just have the themes in place. What kind of episode we're dealing with here? We learn in this episode more about the context of Ada's mom and her dad, just giving us more insight and background to that. Ada's mom obviously in hospital and discovering that she's been ill for a year, but she kept it quiet. And then one of the very endearing themes that I find very interesting that the writer and the producer director brings back into this episode is this theme of, I actually wrote some words down because it struck with me. It's how the continuous, truly caring friendship between the three women comes forward again. In moments of crisis, these three are there for each other. It's almost like a holy sisterhood. And it's really beautiful to watch how that unfolds. Then, of course, there's also the other masculine, feminine theme of love and a dysfunctional other, the dysfunctional husbands, Erdem and Toprak, who can't get their shit together. And the woman, but the woman loves them and can't get out of that love loop. So those are the initial introductory kind of comments I have.
Yeah. So the thing is, what we see in this friendship is that each is living their path from their family system. And so that is why they are three completely different people, but they also have this common theme of how can we support one another where we are in this. So I like the fact that Ada is obviously the one who asks all the questions. And I love this idea because it's an idea that is really weird to think that our parents had to be in love, to be in a relationship for us to have life. And this is something we find sometimes difficult to actually comprehend because children have this, I'm here, my life belongs to me. Yeah. And when you listen to teenagers, one of their biggest arguments with parents is, this is my life. There is no regard that if it wasn't for your mom and dad coming together in a very special way, you would not have had that life. So there's this ownership of, this is my life. And then there is the total disregard of those that had life and breath before you. And I think this is really what life is about. Our parents had a life. They were young ones. They were teenagers once. They fell in love. And then life carried forward. And life carried forward because they made love. Whichever way your life came into being, whether it was love in the concept of in a marriage, or whichever way, two people got together and in a moment of, we can call it lust, in a moment of calling it love or lust, whatever you want to call it, a life was created. And for me, that is the sanctity of life. There is something that happened in that moment where a new life is created.
Yeah.
And therefore, each life has a really special purpose. We may not understand it, and we spoke about the purpose of life in the last episode, but life is really sacred. And I want to hold on to that idea of life is sacred.
Yeah.
Because we see how sacred life is when we get to a part in our life where life comes to an end. Like in this episode, Ada's mom's life is slowing to an end. But it's been slowing to an end for a whole year. But Ada was unaware of it. She was so caught up in her own life. She was so caught up in her own problems. She was so caught up in her anger with her mother that she could not bring together the sacredness of the bond between herself and her mother. And this is what this episode is about. The sacredness of the bond between mother and daughter in this episode.
I love that word sacredness, and the other word that springs to mind as you say it is also the mystery. You know, what is this thing that causes this attraction between a man and a woman, and from from that union comes this whole thing about a new life, new generations that just flows down the river of life. It's such a reverent feeling that one gets when you work with families, when you work with the field, in discovering these themes and in helping couples to align themselves more to this sacred energy.
Yes, and then it is the belief that when mom doesn't give us whatever we wanted, or when there is a dispute, in this case, Ada's mom leaves, and Ada believes my mother does not love me. But she believes my mother does not love me because of an incident that happens in the classroom, where we see the image of the doll that is in the mother's handbag, and it's the image that happens in the classroom, where the mother gives her reprimands her in front of the children in the classroom, and Adas is so hurt by this that she now has a belief system: my mother doesn't love me. And obviously this belief system carries on and on and on, and it just fuels her anger as she grows older.
Yeah. And then Ada's mom and a grandmother also have some stories, because there was also a kind of when Ada's mom came with a beautiful, joyous announcement that she's going to get married, then the grandmother slapped her. So it's kind of like a repetitive theme there. That people get slapped willy-nilly for no real reason. So it's interesting how that repeats then with Ada as well.
So the thing is that slapping is at a time where there's a huge sense of helplessness. And I think it's just an expression of that helplessness. We don't know what's behind the pain between the mother slapping her daughter, other than, I don't want you to marry that man.
Yeah.
And then the mother is also the one who notices that the husband has another woman by the side. And obviously, the mother knew something that the grandmother knew something that we don't want to listen to when we are children. When our parents know something, we don't want to hear what they know. We don't want to know what is it that they are fearful of. And so there is already this difficulty that then is also between the mother and the grandmother. But Ada has a safe place to go to. She goes to the grandmother.
Mm.
And that is where she gets her support. And it is there that the grandmother encourages her and says, you have such tiny fingers. You'd be excellent at sewing up and becoming a doctor. So it is.
And it's very interesting that it all happens there in the hospital as she waits for her mom, who's now in a coma. She opens the handbag and there's the little doll. Another beautiful transitional scene builder by the scriptwriter that takes us to the past, but in the present moment, and how that triggers the memories in Ada about what her mother's words were in terms of you could become a doctor.
Yeah, the grandmother encouraged.
The grandmother, yeah.
Because she had a very close relationship to the grandmother, and therefore is also the mirror that comes into the effect. The mirror that we saw in earlier episodes is...
That's right. Yeah.
Where the mirror comes in and where there is that closeness of the brushing of the hair, because that's a connection between mother and daughter, that brushing of the hair.
So we now have two devices, and then we will see later in this episode a third device, and that is the sewing machine that Fico now fixes up, which is also part of those earlier scenes in the previous episodes.
Yeah. So it's little memory, shall I say, tokens that we hold on to, and that bring back an important scene in our life. So that's very poignant. And I think in this session, I want us to stay with Ada and finish with her, because Ada doesn't believe in Zaman's work. But now she needs help. She's conflicted. Yeah. She doesn't know how to deal with her mom's passing. She's guilt-ridden. So there's a lot of turmoil in Ada at this point. And we see Zaman coming and doing a different constellation. And that's such a surprise for everybody, because is this a constellation? Is this what Zaman calls the field of expansion? And we just use objects. And he just quietly says to Ada, choose yourself, your mother, and your great-grandmother. And so we see that he now brings in the element of the different women.
And like in a normal constellation field, where the client is able to sit on the outside of the constellation circle with a facilitator, like in that case, what he does beautifully here is he lets her also sit with him, looking from the outside in. And it's beautiful in the words. Take a look at yourself. Take a look at yourself. What are you thinking? What are you feeling? Taking them from the brain to the heart, and then pick a stone for your mother. So it's beautiful how he processes that right there on the table with the stones.
Yes. And so he does this mini constellation with her, and he sees that she can't move. So again, it comes back to Ada is stuck. But he doesn't use that stuckness in relationship to the woman. He uses the stuckness in, you have something that is unfinished business that has nothing to do with your mother or your grandmother in this sense. It goes somewhere else. But what I loved about this constellation is it was not, she wanted healing for her mother, because those other constellations have always been healing, healing, healing. And this one is not going the same route. This one is making peace within herself, to be able to allow the passing of her mother.
Mm.
And then we see the picture of the grandmother and the mother and that love relationship, how important that is. So in our last hours, when we depart the world, we come in the world through our mother, but we also want to depart the world with our mother. And I found that so, so, so special.
Mm. Absolutely. And as you say that, the scenes of my own mother's departure, when I was with her at the last moments, that comes back very strongly. That's very touchy. And it's so true. It makes life so much more meaningful if you can stand by when the parents or the grandparents make an exit.
Yes, but it gives Ada the peace that she needs.
Mm.
She understands. She understands the dynamic between her and her mother, and she understands the dynamic between her mother, with other words, her mother and the grandmother. And so, and she's open to that. She now is in agreement that her mother is going to go and be with the grandmother. And I found that soul healing, if I want to use a word. You just have to respect when a life comes to an end, even if there is now no longer any time for you and your mother to come to a good place together. And that's the sadness here, is that she did not have the time to make peace with her mother, yet right at the end, she is with her mother in a peaceful way. And I think it's that moment that is very important.
That's a beautiful moment. I remember last episode, we also ended up with a beautiful moment where Sergei and Toprak speak to each other, and she says, you can't let a little daughter not be with her father. I will help you. So that was the highlight scene of the last episode. For me, this one is when Ada's mom, her last words actually, is that she has been dreaming all night long, and her mother has been stroking her hair. Kind of the last closure of the episode around that story.
Yeah. So I think this is what makes, for me, family constellation so special, is those realizations of how sacred our relations with our parents are. And if we don't honor that sacredness, the pain that we experience as a result. But it's never too late. We can always make peace.
This work can be done. And just to repeat those words, where she says, where someone says to her, there's nothing you can do. You just need to respect, and then the rest is your mom's path. So you can do what you need to do for yourself as a catalyst in the family system, but then there's a point of respect. You need to allow them to do the rest.
And what comes up for me here is, yes, the teenager, this is my life, means I have a path in this life. That is my path. But also honoring the path that our parents walked. as their path. So it doesn't mean we have to have the same path. We have to have separate paths, but our paths are interlinked.
Mm.
And then there's
Beautiful.
obviously the lighter moments. We see a very short interlude with Erdem and Layla.
You mean on the riverbank?
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I call where he got the proverbial cold water on his plants when she throws the bucket over his head.
Where she, for the first time, realizes the way he sees her and basically blames her for his problems. And she says, I did it for you. And then there is this, and then she realizes where he is at. And she says, no. You have your part to take this.
Yeah, that scene is very alive. It's very strong language, but it comes over very authentic. So I just love that scene. Even though it was translated from Turkish into English, it's really brilliantly done between the two of them.
And then here we have Layla reflecting back to her father that she hasn't seen in 10 years. Again, probably the father knew that the husband she was going to marry was maybe not in his mind the right husband for his daughter. But do you see what we do? We give up our connection to our parents to go forward with a partner that may be well suited, but may also not be well suited. And we do so stubbornly because we feel this is my life. How dare you, old man, old woman, tell me what I have to do in my life? So we take on our journey, and then we take the responsibility for that journey, whether we like it or not. But what is interesting is that the parent then comes in at the time when the need is there and says, I'm going to give you a warning. Please heed my warning. So the parent always is on the lookout. They never stay away, completely severed. They are on the lookout. So what comes from here is the child can sever the relationship with the parent, but the parent does not really easily sever the relationship with the child. There's always this need for, I need to look out for you. And we see that now with Ada's mom, and we see that with Layla's dad as well.
Before we move entirely off Ada, say a little bit more about why did Ada's mother leave that bed scene where the father was on his deathbed? Is that still a bit of mystery that will be cleared up later?
That mystery is cleared up right at the end. So it'll probably be cleared up in the next or the following episode. But the reason we see that is because that is where Ada finally disconnected from her mother, because she was so angry with her mother for leaving the father, not understanding the circumstances.
Correct.
So she blames the mother. And,
yes, the mother walks out. Yeah. The mother walks out, and Ada is then kind of forced to take over the caretakership of her father. She begs him to go to hospital, and he refuses. And then soon after that, we see the funeral scene where she bumps into the mother, and the relationship is totally disconnected.
Yes. So, and this is the thing is, let's look at it. We are born from the sacredness of that love that created us. And then whatever happens between the parents, the child gets lost, doesn't know what to do with this. How dare the mother walk out on the father? And so the child has to pick a loyalty. And in this case, she picks the loyalty with her father. Yeah. And she picks the loyalty with her father because she doesn't know the story. And isn't that what we often do, because we only get half stories, because we don't really know what's going on? We make an assumption, we pick a loyalty, and then that's where we're stuck.
The assumption is such a big teacher in everybody's life. Making assumptions, and then later on the clarification. I thought differently. I now see it differently.
But you see, here comes then also the question. If the child does not know the full story, how can the child make any different assumption? He's not given the truth. So my question is, should parents give their children the truth? At the same time, what goes on between the parents has nothing to do with the child. So the key here is the parents could not resolve it for themselves to give their child the truth. And so it's that part that is not resolved that causes this conflict for Ada.
So as you say, that will be revealed later on in the last episode.
Yeah.
So then we have some more endearing little moments in this episode. I love the, yeah. Go ahead.
Carry on. You love?
I love the kind of there's warm scenes in the car on a trip between Fico and Sergei, where he calls her counselor. Now suddenly she's counselor, and this whole thing with the music and the whole scene with the siren is so comical and so beautifully done. And
yeah, he really is totally innocent. He is he's so pure in what he does. He has nothing to hide. And that's so stunning in that he's just of the earth. That's what I would like.
Very grounded, yeah. But she loves his cologne. And then later the scenes with the cat is also quite amusing.
Yes. And then there is also a very short interaction where Toprak and Fico have a little chat, and Toprak shares with Fico that Zaman was his father's student, but that's not explained unless I missed it.
Yeah. In other words, Zaman studied with Toprak's father,
who was, remember that he was what we would call a spiritual leader with the Gypsy congregation.
Right. But there's also nuendos where the father blames him for being an artist, that he should have done something different. If I remember, we can just go back and check that.
Yes. The thing is, I don't think that is in this episode. So the only thing is, what comes up in this episode is the link between Toprak and Zaman.
Right.
That's the only thing that comes up. And I think if there are future episodes, or if there's another series, we would get more insight into that, because it leaves us a little bit hanging there.
Quite correct.
But what it says is Zaman looks out for Toprak.
Yes.
And that's
because
really
he got himself in trouble by beating up the mother's boyfriend of his daughter, right? The boyfriend of his previous girlfriend, with who he has now the daughter. there was an altercation. It seems like Toprak is this very hot-blooded, artistic temperament that can't hold his fist back. And so Zaman is helping him with that situation.
So he gets a bit carried away, and Zaman is sort of being a voice of reason for him. And so we see that, so that comes in very shortly, and then we take it from there, where Fico shares his vulnerability, because he doesn't really talk about himself, and he shares that his mother took off when him and his brother were little children, and then they were left with a father whose next woman was very cruel to him and his brother. And so we see the vulnerable side of Fico coming through, the reason why he is so earthbound. He had to stand up for himself, had to stand up. But again, we're talking about the relationship, that the child relationship that is dependent on both the mother and the father. And when the mother left, the children lost both parents. They lost the mother and they lost the father, because the father then took another woman who was absolutely cruel to him. And so that's when my heart went out to Fico, because he didn't have a good relationship on the female side of his upbringing. And that comes through in not knowing how to actually address a female in a good way, because he doesn't quite trust a female, can he? So he's very, very shy around women.
I notice when Sergei asks him or probes him to tell a little bit about whether he got married before, he says, no, we'll park that one for later as well. He didn't want to talk straight away about that story.
And then we have this where Sergei sort of gives Fico a little kiss.
It's quite a sweet scene there, where she makes him food and they sit there, and then they discover the cat the next morning, and that sparks a thing between them.
And it's a beautiful scene in Ada's home, or in Ada's mother's home, where they are given a task to do, and obviously they fail. I mean, who can keep a cat inside that's really desperate to run away? And the fact that the cat then brought a mate, and so the whole thing is a little bit touch and go. Who are we in this situation? And what is our place? What is it that we are discovering in this place that is actually Ada's mom's place? And then Fico goes and just does what's so naturally for him. He loves just fixing things. So, and you picked up the part of where he then picks up the sewing machine, where then links into that was how Ada's grandmother made her living.
Exactly. When Ada's grandmother stood up when she got the news that her daughter is going to get married, she stood up from that exact sewing machine and walked over and slapped her. So that whole scene is very poignant and full of energy. But he uses that and he fixes that. It's a kind of a symbolic moment that the constellation can be fixed, can be healed. The constellation work, yes, can be healing. Yeah.
And so there's a lot of healing with those three articles in terms of the doll. There's a healing around that inner child in Ada. Then we have the mirror, which is a healing between Ada and her grandmother, or that special bond between Ada and her grandmother. And then we've got the sewing machine, which is the bond that links between Ada's mother and the grandmother, because that's how Ada's mother actually survived and provided for them. So these are just little objects that are placed, but they have huge significance in what they symbolize.
Mm. And then the cat comes back with his companion.
Yeah. So this is a little bit of a shorter episode, but there is a lot of child-parent relationships that we can look at in this episode, and the importance of those relationships, the sacredness of those relationships, and what happens when those relationships struggle. So I want to leave it as that. Anything more from you, Leon?
No, that's all. It's been lovely to go through this episode as well. As you say, it's much shorter than the other episodes. The others go up to 50 minutes plus, and this one is just around 42 minutes. But it ends up in a good way. It feels like there's closure towards the end of this episode as well on a couple of things.
Yes, but it also, I love the idea that it's now moved away from other relationships to the relationships where we are at the center of our universe, where we come into life, and that we cannot be in this life without our parents. So and how that affects us when we have difficulty in those relationships. So thank you, Leon, for being here again today. And I look forward to our next episode. So have an awesome day. We'll chat again.
Thanks, Anya. Bye.
Bye.